Liza Drains a Bodybuilder by MagnusMagneto, commissioned by Coms. As Liza ran to the downtown gym, she could hardly believe how easily her body moved. Instead of being winded within a mile, she kept a steady pace, barely breaking a sweat by the time she arrived. Too excited by the prospect of draining more muscle for herself, Liza hadn't bothered changing clothing before leaving the apartment. Instead, she wore the same tattered clothes she had outgrown, which revealed almost the entirety of her rippling, chiseled physique. The feeling of the cool breeze blowing against her combined with the rush of endorphins made her almost consider starting an exercise routine of her own. Though I'd rather just suck the power out of others, she thought to herself with a twisted smile as she approached the main entrance. Stepping through the door, Liza was surprised to find that the attendant behind the desk didn't bother checking if she had a membership. Guess with this physique they think I'm a regular, she decided. She was surprised again to find that there weren't a bunch of 300-pound bodybuilders like she expected. Instead, the most muscular men in the room were only a little larger than Joe was, and definitely smaller than herself. Well, that's lame. There's no real men here either, she pouted. May as well see how strong I am before deciding which of these losers to drain next. Liza walked up to a dumbbell rack and grabbed onto a pair of 20-pound weights. She yanked them up so quickly that she almost hit herself in the face with them. What the? The few times she ever tried exercising before, she struggled to curl weights half as heavy. Yet these felt comically light. Wow, this is awesome, she thought before putting the weights down and picking up a pair of 40-pound dumbbells instead. She exerted herself a little to lift them, but was able to perform smooth curls with relative ease. Her eyes glistened with excitement at the sight of her rippling 18-inch biceps, thick veins running down them pulsing with each rep. A couple of men around her were gawking. The largest among them was curling only 35-pound weights. Heh, eat your hearts out, plebs, she thought, becoming slightly aroused by her superiority. Wanting to better challenge herself, Liza put the 40-pound dumbbells down and replaced them with a pair of 50s. She had to try harder, but was still able to finish a dozen smooth reps before placing the weights back down. She indulgently flexed in the mirror a few times, loving the sight of her pumped arms, nearly drooling at her rippling peaks. A few more men were staring now, as were a couple of women. Liza feasted on the attention, though she was more interested in the muscles she could steal from them, and she was also a little mad that not every single person in the room was awestruck by her. In the reflection of the mirror, Liza noticed a hulking man enter the gym. He was even taller and more muscular than her, every inch of his thick frame bulging with rippling muscle. Now that's a real man, she thought, immediately drawn to him. She had always been attracted to bodybuilders, and after becoming as strong as she was, the thought of a man even stronger was far more enticing than before. But as attracted as she was to his muscles, the hunger to have them for herself was greater. Liza sauntered over towards him, deliberately swaying her hips and placing her arms behind her head, revealing her wide lats. To her delight, his eyes lit up, and she knew he was hers. Hey there, big guy. Want to show me how a real man handles the weights? He grinned at her and replied, You look like you know how to handle them better than most, but sure. Liza entered his space, placing a hand on one of his huge pecs. It was like a rock beneath his soft tank top. She had to resist the urge to start draining him then and there. You really like my body, huh? The man said before flexing his chest, the muscle within Liza's grasp somehow becoming harder. She blushed a little, equally aroused by feeling such power firsthand and imagining taking it for herself. Speechless, huh? He added, grin broadening. It's all right, I have that effect on women, he chuckled. Liza cleared her throat and regained her composure as best she could. So, what exercise are you going to show me first? The man shrugged. Got any requests? She eyed him up and down, better noticing how massive the man's thighs were. Each one was easily as thick as his trim waist. How about squats? Sure. He wrapped his arm around Liza's shoulders, her heart fluttering a little in surprise. She had never been embraced by someone so big and warm before. I probably never could have scored a guy like this before taking Joe's muscles. Kind of a shame I need to take his too. He let go of her at the squat rack, where he started to load plate after plate onto the barbell. Liza's eyes widening further with each addition. She almost salivated at both the thought of watching this man lift so much weight and eventually being able to do so herself. Finally, the man stopped adding weights. He stepped back and grinned proudly. 600 pounds. That's what I can do for reps, he said before sliding beneath the bar. Gonna spot me? Sure, Liza said before standing behind him. She had never actually spotted someone before, and instead tried her best to imitate what she saw others doing. As the man lowered himself, Liza put her hands on his broad back and activated her magic. She grit her teeth to suppress a groan of pleasure at the sensation of her thighs and hips thickening a half-inch, taking most of her self-control to not drain him faster, and all of it to not drain him further. Rising back up, the man wobbled a little, struggling to stand up straight. Sorry, he grunted, setting the weight down with a heavy thud. There's something off with me today. This should be easy. Liza smirked and with a condescending tone said, Maybe you're just trying to lift too much. Try less weight. The bodybuilder hesitated for a moment, but relented by taking off a pair of 10-pound weight plates before positioning beneath the bar again. As he descended, Liza quickly repeated the process, this time indulging her desires more and draining 3/4 of an inch off of his thighs, glutes, and calves. She bit her lower lip with excitement at the feeling of her shorts riding ever higher. He struggled even harder to stand this time, prompting Liza to actually help a little to bring the weight back onto the bar. You sure you ever repped 600? I think you need to take off like at least 30 more pounds. He glared at her briefly before turning to the bar and doing as she suggested, bringing the weight down to 550 pounds total. Liza set her palms against his broad back, feeling the powerful fibers of the muscles beneath her touch before draining him more aggressively than before, siphoning muscle from his entire body at once. She gasped softly, eyes sparkling with delight as she watched her forearms thickening, the veins becoming more prominent under her skin. Her top tightened against her expanding chest, the straps becoming comparatively smaller on top of her burgeoning shoulders, while her upper abs bulged against its thin fabric. The bodybuilder faltered harder than ever, nearly toppling over, only saved by Liza's recently strengthened grip. She almost drained him again, but resisted the urge, hoping to not draw more attention to herself just yet. The man sighed with frustration before setting the weight down on the rack with a heavy thud. He took a step back, panting deeply. I don't understand, he muttered with confusion. I've never struggled this much before. Liza's lips twisted into a wicked smile, her eyes dancing with glee. Maybe you're just having an off day, she suggested, her honey-sweet tone belying a growing contempt for his increasing weakness. She glared at his body with predatory hunger, resisting the urge to immediately continue draining him, then back to her own. She was nearly as muscular as he was now. He looked at her with exasperation, but didn't seem to notice the changes to their bodies. How is this possible? I must have taken at least 20, maybe even 30 or 40 pounds of muscle from him. This guy must be so self-absorbed that he can't see what's happening, she thought, further justifying the crime to herself. Angered by his lack of discernment, Liza dropped the false kindness. And maybe instead of trying to show off to me, you should use some weight you can actually handle. How about 500 pounds, she said. The man frowned at Liza's suggestion, his pride clearly wounded. I can handle it. I just need a moment to... His words trailed off as he noticed her staring at him. Fine, he muttered with annoyance. He adjusted the weights, removing a pair of 25-pound plates from the barbell, reducing the total weight to 500 pounds. As he positioned himself beneath the bar again, Liza moved closer, her eyes shining with anticipation. She placed her hands on his back, squeezing the remaining muscles. Soon these will be mine, she thought, her heart pounding with anticipation. While the man lowered himself, Liza activated her power again, this time draining with full force. She was amazed and a little disappointed that nobody, including the bodybuilder, seemed to notice her brightly glowing hands. But this quickly gave way to the thrill of feeling her body expand again as pound after pound of lean mass flowed into her eager form. Her tank top strained against her swelling chest, the fabric stretching to accommodate the growing mass of her pecs. Her biceps bulged, the veins on her arms becoming even more pronounced. Her waist remained trim, accentuating the flare of her widened lats and expanding hips, while her shorts nearly disappeared as her glutes swallowed more of them. The bodybuilder nearly collapsed under the weight. Liza, stronger than ever, easily helped him re-rack the bar. He stepped back, panting and sweating with a baffled expression. I just don't understand. It's like I've lost strength, he mumbled, looking at his hands. Liza grinned at his confusion. She flexed her newly enhanced muscles, delighting in their size and strength and the feeling of them nearly bursting through her clothes. Between her gain and his loss, she was now more muscular than him, though she hadn't touched his height yet. The thought of being stronger than him thrilled her. "Maybe you should take it easy," she suggested with a condescending tone. She crossed her arms, her forearms bulging impressively as she did so. "After all, you wouldn't want to hurt yourself." He looked at her with an upset expression, starting to open his mouth. But before he could say anything, Liza interrupted him. "Or maybe you should just accept that you're not as strong as you thought you were." He shook his head in disbelief. Liza continued. "In fact, how about you let me handle that weight and show you how it's really done?" She stepped forward with even greater confidence than before, slipped under the bar, and stood up tall with it on her back. The weight felt trivial for her new strength. With a smooth, effortless motion, she lowered herself into a squat, the muscles of her glutes and thighs bulging impressively under the strain. Rising back up, she flashed a triumphant grin at the bodybuilder, her eyes sparkling with delight. "Is that all?" she taunted, laughing. "Come on, add more weight." He hesitated for a moment, his expression a mix of confusion and disbelief. "Do it," she ordered again. With some reluctance, he added 2 25-pound plates. Even with the additional plates, Liza had no trouble moving the weight. To the man's amazement, each repetition she performed looked more effortless than the last, as she became used to the motion she had never trained before. After finishing a dozen reps, she racked the weight. "Still think you can match me?" she asked with arrogance. She flexed her biceps, which rippled impressively. The bodybuilder didn't respond, looking lost in thoughts. How can he still be so oblivious, she thought. This guy must be totally blinded by his ego. He's too self-centered to even comment or even notice how different I look. I totally deserve all of his muscles more than he does, she uncharitably assumed. Let's get him somewhere private and do just that. Liza smirked and stepped closer to him, her eyes gleaming. "I think you need to pick me up," she said, her voice low and suggestive. "Let's go to the locker room and see if a quick fuck can snap you out of it." His eyes widened at her words, taken aback by her forwardness. But before he could respond, she cut him off again, her smirk broadening. "Don't worry, big guy," she teased, her hand running over his arm in a possessive gesture, fighting the urge to drain the rest of his biceps right there. "I promise I'll be gentle." He hesitated for a moment longer before finally nodding eagerly. The smirk on Liza's face widened as she grabbed him by the small of his back, her fingers digging into its flesh. She guided him towards the locker room with a firm grip. Once inside, he began to pull his shorts down, but was halted by her hand grabbing his arm. She activated the magic with no restraint, hands lighting up brighter than ever before. His muscles immediately deflated while he shrank down, the power flowing into her with a force she didn't expect, causing her to groan loudly with an ecstasy she never felt before. He tried to pull away, but it was futile. She was too strong for him now. Muscle piled onto Liza's expanding frame while his dwindled away. She watched with glee as her perspective shifted higher, the world around her feeling smaller by the moment while he experienced the inverse. Her clothes strained against her burgeoning mass, top and bra tearing apart, revealing her now massive, sculpted chest, while her shorts yielded to the pressure of her expanding glutes and thighs. Next, her sneakers burst open, unable to contain her growing feet. I'm getting better at this, she thought, heart pounding with exhilaration. I really do deserve this magic, and all of the muscle I want, she thought, ego soaring to ever greater heights. After draining the once proud bodybuilder to a state more pathetic than she left Joe, leaving barely enough vitality for him to live. She stepped away and moved towards a large mirror nearby. Each powerful stride of her long legs produced a loud thud. She grinned broadly at the reflection, enraptured with what she saw. Yes, I look like a god now, she thought, taking in every detail of her new form. Her arms were massive, each one nearly the size of her head, connected to deltoids resembling striated cannonballs, flanking an immensely broad and barreled chest. Her waist remained small as before, now less than half the width of her shoulders and packed with inhumanly dense abs, flaring back out into vast hips. Her tree-trunk thighs were now the thickest she had ever seen, and were completely carved from muscle, each quadricep larger than her midsection, standing above calves that measured well over 30 inches in circumference. Liza indulgently posed in the mirror, gawking at how the tendons and striations danced under her command. She pumped her biceps, bounced her pecs, and crunched her abs, groaning with ecstasy as she ran her fingers across the pumped muscles. Satisfied with having looked at herself long enough, Liza turned her attention to the man. He had shrunk so much that he fell out of his clothing and was also naked, though his entire body had less mass than just one of her titanic legs. The top of his head only reached the bottom of her huge chest, eyes now level with her abs. Liza looked down at him with a wicked smile on her face. "Guess you're not so big and strong now, are you?" she taunted, her voice dripping with arrogance. She chuckled, her laughter echoing in the small locker room. To her surprise, instead of backing away with fear, the man became visibly erect. He staggered over to her, reaching up, clearly trying to initiate the sex she had promised him before. "Ew, you pathetic little twerp, you don't deserve to touch me," Liza scoffed before shoving him hard, sending him flying across the room into a locker with a loud crash coupled with the sound of bones breaking. She laughed loudly, her powerful voice filling the air around them. "You've served your purpose, loser. Time for me to use these muscles to steal even more for myself." Leaving the man in a panting, broken state, Liza left the locker room. Totally stark naked, she strode out with greater confidence than she ever had before in her life, legs carrying her far further with each step than they did before. She had to duck a little to not hit her head on the doorframe of the exit. As she emerged into the gym, heads finally turned towards her as regulars and newcomers alike gawked at the nude Amazonian woman. With an evil smirk, she scanned the room, calculating who her next victim would be. To be continued.